Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Satma Vandamui Sabhadana Yahara Prasade Bhai Baba Toriya Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chite Te Goriya Aikya Ana Koriyo Maneya Shri Guru Charane Rati Se Utama Gati Jai Prasade Pure Sarva Asha Saku Dandilo Ye Janme Janme Prabhu Say Divya Gyan Hriday Prakashita Prema Bhaktiyaha Hoite Avidya Vinashayate Vedagaya Haracharita Sri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adama Janara Bandhu Sri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adama Janara Bandhu Lokana Slokera Jivana Lokanato kera jivana Ha ha Prabhu Korodoya Deho More Padachaya Ha ha Prabhu Korodoya Deho More Padachaya Ebeyash Kushukti Bhuvana Ebeyash Kushukti Bhuvana Tui Pade Laila Sarana Gurudev Patita Pavana Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastyatya Deshatharine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhar, Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Shama Sundar Radha Shama Sundar Radha. Jaya Krishna Balaram Jaya Krishna Balaram Jaya Krishna Balaram Jaya Krishna Balaram. Jaya Gaura Nitai, Jaya Gaura Nitai, Jaya Gaura Nitai, Jaya Gaura Nitai. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakacharyas Sata Sri Srimadis Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Namantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki. ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki. Namacharya Sri Haridas Thakur Ki. Prem Se Ko Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Gadada Srivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinda Ki. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki. Vrindavan Dham Ki. Mayapur Dham Ki, Jagannath Puri Dham Ki, Tulsi Maharani Ki, Gangamai Ki, Munamai Ki, Bhakti Devi Ki, Harinam Sankirtan Ki, Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories Shri Shri Guru and Shri Garanga.
Shri Shri Radhesham ki jai. Shri Ram Navami ki jai. So I'm reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. And this part is called An Unknown Friend. Let the sharp moralists accuse me of being illusioned. I do not mind. Experts in Vedic activities may slander me as being misled. Friends and relatives may call me frustrated. My brothers may call me a fool. The wealthy Mammonites may point me out as mad. And the learned philosophers may assert that I am much too proud. Still my mind does not budge an inch from the determination to serve the lotus feet of Govinda, though I am unable to do it. Who spoke these words? Jai, Madhavendra Puri ki jai. He was the one who spoke. Aside from his difficulties with business and family, Abhay had to survive the cataclysms of Indian independence and partition. He was not actively He was not active politically, but was one of hundreds of millions affected by the violent dawn of Indian independence. While Gandhi and the Hindu-dominated Congress were demanding a united free India, the Muslim League, led by M.A. Jinnah, called for partition in their own Muslim nation, Pakistan. The conflict raged. In August of 1946, the outgoing British government invited Jawaharlal Nehru, Congress Party president, to form an interim national government, but the League objected. The Muslim cause would be denied. Jinnah had already declared August 16th Direct Action Day, which amounted to little in most parts of India, but in Calcutta erupted in Hindu-Muslim rioting. In 5 days of violence, 4,000 died and thousands more were wounded. In the months that followed, Hindu-Muslim rioting repeatedly flared up throughout India. Srila Prabhupada partition tour India, leaving 5 million Sikhs and Hindus in Pakistan and as many Muslims in India, and the great migration began. Refugees fleeing from Pakistan to India and from India to Pakistan clashed with each other, and even with their own countrymen of the opposing faith, and the violence that erupted claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Srila Prabhupada said, "Our independence movement was started by Mahatma Gandhi ji for uniting all the different sections of the people. But actually the result was that instead of being united, India was partitioned. And the partition became so poisonous that formerly there was only sporadic Hindu-Muslim riots in some places. But now there was organized fighting between Pakistan and Hindustan. So actually we were not being united, we were being separated. The Hindus would go to the mosque of the Muslims and break it, and the Muslims would go to the temples of the Hindus and break the idol. And they will think, we have finished the Hindus' God. Just like the Hindus also think, oh, we have broken their God. They are all ignorant. God cannot be Hindu, God cannot be Muslim, God cannot be Christian. God is God. We have seen in 1947 Hindu-Muslim fighting. One party was Hindu, the other party was Muslim. They fought and so many died, and after death there was no distinction who was Hindu or who was Muslim. The municipal men gathered them together in piles to throw them somewhere. They fought, and in Bagh Bazaar there were heaps of dead bodies. And when it is a dead body, nobody could understand who was Hindu and who was Muslim. Simply it was to be cleared from the road. Abai was expecting Indian independence to bring any real solution. Abai was not expecting Indian independence to bring any real solutions. Unless the leaders were God-conscious, what change would there be? Now he saw that instead of suffering at the hand of the foreign rule, the people were free to suffer under their own countrymen. In fact, the fighting and suffering had increased. Throughout the years of India's political struggles, Abai had never lost his desire to propagate Krishna consciousness. He had seen how promises of unity and independence had brought mostly higher prices and civic mismanagement. He had seen neighborhoods where Indians had lived peacefully for generations erupt in hatred and rioting in the wake of British and Indian diplomatic manipulations. It was as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had described it. Persons who are strongly entrapped by the consciousness of enjoying material life and who have therefore accepted as their leader or guru a similar blind man attached to external sense objects cannot understand that the goal of life is to return home back to Godhead and engage in the service of Lord Vishnu. As blind men guided by another blind man miss the right path and fall into a ditch, materially attached men led by another materially attached man are bound by the ropes of fruitive labor, which are made of very strong cords. And they continue again and again in materialistic life, suffering the threefold miseries. The Vaishnava prays to his spiritual master, who has opened my eyes with the torchlight of transcendental knowledge, and he feels obliged to help humanity by bearing the same torch. As a representative of the eternal Vaishnava Parampara, Abhay wanted to shed the light of transcendental knowledge onto the field of current crises. That had been the purpose of Back to Godhead, although since 1944 he had been unable to print the magazine. But even without the means to publish, Abhay continued writing. His most ambitious project was Gita-Upanishad, his translation and commentary of Bhagavad Gita. Gandhi and others often spoke of the wisdom of Bhagavad Gita. Indians never forgot their Gita, but most prominents did not teach it as Krishna had taught it. They would not recognize Lord Krishna, the speaker of their Gita, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but would extract his words as slogans or bolster their own philosophies. Whether political leaders, religious leaders, or scholars, they almost invariably made their own symbolic or allegorical interpretations. Abhay wanted to present Bhagavad Gita as is. It was to be 1,200 pages, 3 illustrated, beautifully bound volumes. For Abhay, the books were already a reality from which he was separated only by time. Over the past 2 years, he had accumulated hundreds of manuscript pages. He wrote in notebooks and on loose papers, and then typed numbered manuscript pages. He could never give the book his full name, but gradually it began to take shape. He also preached Lord Chaitanya's message through letters, writing to many leaders in the government, to respectable acquaintances, and to people whose articles he had read or whose activities had caught his eye in a newspaper. Presenting himself as a humble servant, he wrote to them of his ideas on how India's original Krishna-conscious culture could be applied as a successful solution to all manners of dilemmas. Sometimes his letters drew replies, and Abhay would respond, fanning the sparks of interest wherever he would find them. A well-known reformer, Mahendra Pratap Raj, was forming what he called the World Federation. Abhay had read a news sheet which Mr. Pratap had published from Vrindavan, in which he addressed all nations and peoples of the world and called for a unity of mankind. Abhay wrote to him suggesting that Lord Krishna's teachings in Bhagavad Gita provided a theistic science capable of uniting all religions. Mr. Pratap replied in May of 1947, I admire your deep study of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. I myself am a great admirer of the great classic. I assure you that I am working strictly according to the book. Mr. Pratap mentioned his book, Religion of Love, and suggested that Abhay read it if he wanted to know the World Federation's view of religion. In the meanwhile, Mr. Pratap wrote, I do not agree to your suggestion of making the name of Krishna or Govinda as the basis of the unity of religions. This would amount to conversion and wouldn't lead to unity of religions. I highly appreciate your efforts in the direction of Back to Godhead. Abhay got the book, read it, and in July of 1947, while he was visiting Kanpur, he wrote a reply. He had traveled to Kanpur not as a spiritual teacher, but as a pharmaceutical salesman. Yet a typewriter had been available, and out had come his preaching. This is what he said. In continuation of my last postcard, I beg to inform you that I have finished the reading of your book, Religion of Love. In my opinion, the whole thesis is based on the philosophy of pantheism, and the approach is made by the services of mankind. He read the whole book, and now he's giving his summary. Religion of love is a true religion's idea, but if the approach is made through the service of mankind only, then the process is made imperfect, partial, and unscientific. The true religion of love is perfectly inculcated in the Bhagavad Gita. Besides, you have not quoted any authority for all your statements. So it is more or less dogmatic. If different men put different dogmatic views about religion and its essentials, who is to be accepted and who is not to be? Therefore, the approach shall be and must be authoritative, scientific, and universal. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Abhay then gave a summary of the Bhagavad Gita in 10 points, concluding, the highest service that can be rendered to mankind is therefore to preach the philosophy and religion of Bhagavad Gita for all time, all places, and all people. But extended philosophical dialogue was not usually the result of his letters. In 1947, when Abhay wrote to high government officers of the newly formed government of India, suggesting a remedy for riots, they turned him away. When he asked to talk with the governor of West Bengal, the governor's secretary replied, His Excellency regrets that he is unable to grant you an interview at present, owing to heavy pressure of work. When he wrote to the Assistant Secretary of the Minister of Education, an assistant to the Assistant Secretary replied, The government of India regret that they are unable to accede to your request. Sometimes official interest took the form of a patronizing pat on the head. I'm sure your scheme for establishing peace will meet with response from our Prime Minister. And another, he, the Minister of Education, is glad to see you are taking to rout out communalism. He suggests that you get in touch with such and such. A local official asked not to be seen. I thank you for all that you have written and the fine sentiments which you have expressed. It is no use arguing the matter, as I do not think that I can serve any useful purpose by joining the organization which you wish to set up. And therefore you need not take the trouble of seeing me. I wish you, however, all success. In October, after the Calcutta riots of 1947, Abhay wrote to the chairman of the Rehabilitation Committee, who replied, Regarding Hare Kirtan and Prasadam, you may make any program of your own, but I am afraid I am not interested in the same, nor my committee, and therefore there is no necessity of your meeting with me. He was very direct. Abhay was fulfilling his role as a Vaishnava preacher, and the secretaries of the various government offices were recognizing and addressing him as such. But they could not appreciate his applications of the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita and his suggestions for Hare Kirtan. Occasionally, however, someone seemed interested, Mr. N.P. Ashtana, High Court Advocate, and he replied, I am very much obliged to you for your letter with reference to your broad scheme about spiritual improvement. I thoroughly appreciate the fine feelings which have prompted you to write this letter and the kindness with which you have considered my query. I have been a student of Bhagavad Gita and have also imbibed some of its teachings, but I still lack a good deal and will be glad to be guided by a person of your accomplishment. You may kindly therefore send your scheme to me, on receipt of which I will be able to express my views. It was inevitable that Abhay would think of engaging Mahatma Gandhi in devotional service. Because of his lifetime of courageous, ascetic and moral activities on behalf of his countrymen, Mahatma Gandhi had great power of influence to the Indian masses. As with Mahendra Pratap of the World Federation, Mahatma Gandhi's idea of serving God was to try to bring happiness to man through politics and through his own invented methods. As one Englishman had said of Mahatma Gandhi, he is either a saint amongst the politicians or a politician among the saints. But be that as it may, he was not as yet fully engaged in pure devotional service, and his activities were not those of a Mahatma as described in Bhagavad Gita. The Gita defines a Mahatma as one who fully engages in worshipping Lord Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, always chanting his glories. The Mahatma encourages others to surrender to Krishna. But because as a young man Abhay had been a follower of Gandhi's, Abhay had a special feeling for him. Of course, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had later convinced him to engage exclusively in devotional service. But now Abhay felt his old friendship for Gandhi, even though Gandhi was a towering figure of worldwide fame and Abhay unknown both to Gandhi and to the world. On December 7, 1947, Abhay wrote to Gandhi from Kanpur. Gandhi was living at the Birla Mansion in Delhi, where large military forces throughout the city discouraged Hindu-Muslim rioting. Gandhi's secretary, Pyarelal Nayar, described Gandhi at this time as the saddest man one could picture. The men he had led in the struggle for Indian independence, Nehru, Patel and others, had taken the leadership of the nation, and Gandhi, with his doctrines of non-violence, unity and agrarianism, was now at odds with them in many ways. He feared he was becoming an anachronism. His former colleagues admired him but rejected his leadership. All his programs, Hindu-Muslim unity, non-violence, upliftment for the poor, although praised throughout the world, were failures in the India of 1947. On a recent visit to a Muslim refugee camp, a crowd of Muslims had surrounded his car, had cursed him, and at the public prayer meeting, a Hindu crowd had shouted him down and ended his meeting when he had attempted to read from the Quran. At 78 years, Gandhi was physically weak and melancholy. In all likelihood, Abhai's letter would never reach him. Abhai knew it. Sending a letter to Gandhi would be like putting a note in a bottle and sending it to the sea. It would arrive in the flood of mail and Gandhi would be too busy to see it. But Abhai sent it, nevertheless. This is his letter. Dear friend Mahatma Ji, please accept my respectful namaskar. I am your unknown friend, but I had to write to you at times and again, although you never cared to reply them. I sent you my papers back to Godhead, but your secretaries told me that you have very little time to read the letters and much less for reading the magazines. I asked for an interview with you, but your busy secretaries never cared to reply this. Anyway, as I am your very old friend, although unknown to you, I am writing to you in order to bring you to the rightful position reserved by you. As a sincere friend, I must not deviate from my duty towards a friend like your good self. I tell you as a sincere friend that you must immediately retire from active politics if you do not desire to die an inglorious death. You have 125 years to live as you have desired to live, but if you die an inglorious death, it is no worth. The honor and prestige that you have obtained during the course of your present lifetime were not possible to be obtained by anyone else within the living memory. But you must know that all these honors and prestiges were false, inasmuch as they were created by the illusory energy of Godhead called the Maya. By this falsity, I do not mean to say that your so many friends were false to you, nor you were false to them. By this falsity, I mean illusion, or, in other words, the false friendship and honors obtained thereby were but creation of Maya, and therefore they were always temporary or false, as you may call it. But none of you, neither your friends nor yourself, know this truth. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay, so we'll have our Ram Navami program today. Everybody will get a chance to bathe Lord Ram, Sita, Lakshmana, Hanuman. The program will begin at 3:30 over by the gazebo over there. There's going to be the wedding of Sita Ram, and then after that there will be Abhishek beginning at 4 o'clock. From 4 to 6 will be the Abhishek, everyone will get to bathe, and there will also be the fire jagya at 5 o'clock. And Tamahar Prabhu will be giving the lecture today.
And then Kirtan is regular time, 4:15?
Kirtan is regular time at 4:15. And this is a new one actually. Yeah. Okay, and I don't see the list of those who addressed the deities today. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
And I went up to his apartment, and I walked through. There was this courtyard there, and there was this one devotee, and he was typing. completely immersed in his work, and I associated that his manuscript he was typing, it must have been something that Swami's books. So I went up to the apartment, knocked on the door, and the door opened. Swami was there. I said, yes. I said, well, I'd like to speak with you. And he, oh yes, come in. And then we went in together to his little sitting room. Prabhupada sat down behind this little metal box. Looked very quaint. And we started talking. He asked me my name. And I told him Bruce. And Prabhupada was talking about in India during the Raj, there was one Lord Bruce, so on. And then I started telling the Swami about myself, and then I just found myself saying that, well, I want to become your student, full time. And actually, I had just finished taking, I had taken a special training for teaching, and I was employed by the New York City Board of Education to teach remedial reading. It was a special program to culturally deprived children, these, you know, in the ghettos. And so I said to Swami that, well, I've just finished my training. Actually, my assignment was beginning the next day. And I said, well, my job actually begins, I have a job and I'm beginning it tomorrow is my assignment, but I just want to be with you. I just want to be your student. So Prabhupada said, well, that's fine. But you have a job. And I said, yes. Prabhupada kind of lit up. He said, oh, what is the salary? So then Prabhupada explained to me Bhagavad Gita in a nutshell. And he explained Krishna telling Arjuna to do his duty, to do devotional service, to work for Krishna, but not partake of the fruits of the activity. Give all the fruits of activity to Krishna. So Prabhupada explained to me, and then he gave me a very practical instruction, first instruction. So he said, you can be my student, and you can also do your job. And you can also give the fruits of your job to Krishna. So my first service was to work and to give my salary to Prabhupada.
The first contact I had with Srila Prabhupada, after having heard that he was starting a temple, was that I was about to move into a place I was going to use as a sculpture studio for myself in the Haight-Ashbury on Frederick Street. As a matter of fact, it was in 518 Frederick Street in San Francisco that I had some friends of mine had the place, and they were turning it over to me. And my first contact with Srila Prabhupada in that sense was I was rather shocked to find that somehow he'd gotten it. My studio. Before I could move in, he'd somehow gotten it away, and I was very upset at that time, and I thought, what am I doing? What's going on here? I had this great studio, and now it's gone. And then I thought to myself, my heart softened, and I said, well, he's a yogi, and he's doing good, so I guess that's okay. You know, and so I forgave fate, little realizing what an amazing turnaround was going to take place.
We had an altar before even Lord Jagannath came. So, in a non-self-conscious way, in a way that was very open-minded, Prabhupada Swamiji at the time didn't tell us about Vyasa-san, didn't make us cut our hair, didn't say anything about bowing down. and he just accepted things as they are, and accepted us. And he could have gone for any segment of society, Vivekananda, whatever, try to speak to large groups. Krishna sent us, enthusiastic, young, believing we could do anything. In some ways it was good because already being adventurous or already not being too staid in the lifestyle, we were able to go along and do anything as an adventure. And that's what happened. Anyway, we followed him to the ends of the earth. So the totem pole, there was an artist who came from New York. There was a New York contingent that slowly came to San Francisco. And there was Harvey Cohn, came in a Cadillac, an old Cadillac. We called it the Krishna-lac. It was our car. And so he still did his art, and for some reason, he put a totem pole right by the temple altar in Frederick Street. Here's the altar. And there was a painting of the Panchatattva that he eventually put there. And the totem pole was there with hooked noses and wings and masks and moons. And Prabhupada just accepted it. There was eclectic pictures. Lord Jesus was in the temple. Prabhupada said, Lord Jesus is very nice. And so the totem pole was just part of the temple, and he didn't really tell us to do too much, except very directly. Cooking he taught. Cooking he taught Jamuna and Harsharani, Govinda Dasi. I don't know if she told you about the starvation committee, that he called it the starvation. Well, she chose to perhaps leave that out, but when he was sick at one time, she had this special diet that the doctors told to give him, and Prabhupada wanted stuffed portal or something like that, and he called her the starvation committee.
That my mother came to see Prabhupada after. I was telling her about it, and she wanted to see what... And then my brother came and joined me also. And she wanted to see what we were getting into. And so she came one evening just before the Kirtan. And by that time I had also already been home to visit her, and she saw, we were strict vegetarian. We wouldn't eat the food that she cooked, and the pots were contaminated. She was contaminated. The whole house is contaminated, and so she said, "Hey, what's happening here?" Anyway, so she went to see Prabhupada, and Prabhupada in his room had one folding metal chair, which was meant for VIPs who couldn't sit on the floor. So this chair was put out for her, and she sat on this chair, and everyone else, Prabhupada, us, we sat on the floor. And then she was asking Prabhupada, what are you doing with my boys, and this and that. And Prabhupada was explaining, preaching. And so then at a certain point, Prabhupada asked that, I'm taking care of your sons. They're by that time I had left my apartment and moved into the storefront. Gargamuni also. I'm taking care of them, I'm feeding them and looking after them and providing, and actually we have no income here and so on. Maybe you would like to give some donation. And my mother looked at us and looked at Prabhupada and said, well, donation, I think I've already given a donation. I've donated my sons. And Prabhupada said, oh, yes, 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 very good. And he said, that's okay. And, but by her saying that, and it was like she gave us to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada accepted.
But the strongest presence I remember when I first met Srila Prabhupada was in Golden Gate Park. It was in 1966 or 66 or 67. I was standing there and everyone was out. Hayagriva was playing trumpet. Somebody had kettle drums. There were gongs and cymbals and incense was burning, and Prabhupada was leading a kirtan in, I guess it was on Hippie Hill or a hollow over there in the Haight-Ashbury, and in Golden Gate Park. And he sat there chanting, and I had developed some sort of psychic kinetic powers because of lacking anything better to do with my energy. And I used to be able to play pinballs and move the ball around and do stuff like that, you know. Said one of the things I used to do for pleasure, and it was sort of a interfering demoniac, basically, sort of pleasure, was looking at people when they weren't looking at me and making them turn around. So I thought I'd try that on Srila Prabhupada. Well, we didn't call him Prabhupada back then. He was called Swamiji, or the Swami. And I thought I'd make Swamiji turn around. And I stared and stared and stared, and nothing happened. And I looked at a bunch of other people that were standing around in the crowd, and they turned around very fast, just as though a bee had landed on their neck, you know. And I stared at Prabhupada again, and it didn't happen. I began to be very alarmed. Then something inside of me became very determined, and I said, I am not going to leave this place until Swamiji, the Swami, turns around and looks at me. I want to know that I've made contact with him. And it ceased to be an issue of this ego control of wanting to make someone turn around, but I just wanted to make contact. And I went on and on. I kept on amping up my energy until I was breaking out in a sweat, and nothing happened. He was simply chanting, and he looked very ethereal, sort of as though he were floating in some sort of cosmic amniotic fluid, you know, and he was his kirtan, and he was moving flexibly, and just totally unaffected. Finally, whatever energy in me that wanted him to turn around began to plead and actually beg. And the minute I became very sincerely begging, all of a sudden his eyes floated around to the side, and he looked at me, and it froze me for a moment. His eyes looked as though they were like whale eyes or dolphin eyes, floating in nowhere, some sort of golden light, and they were looking at me, and they hovered there for a moment that seemed like eternity, neither beckoning nor rejecting, just observing. I stood there, and my whole system collapsed from the inside out, and I just stared, and I said, oh my God. And all sorts of confusing emotions ran through me at that time, and I was standing there with a girlfriend, and I wasn't, you know, I was sort of, you know, a hippie-styled person. And outside, I was very confused. Inside, I had an overwhelming thought. I must go and straighten myself out and go to some place where I can really think things through, because I'm not ready to become his disciple yet. My first impulse was to become his disciple.
Then Haridas decided to paint the Panchatattva, but for some reason he thought they were women. It was very different then. And so they were in Hawaii or something, and so he painted them with breasts, the Panchatattva. And so when Prabhupada came in and the new painting was unveiled over the new altar, the eclectic altar, Prabhupada he actually said, at Haridas, and said, those are men, not women, and so please change it. So he changed it. So it was really quite open in the beginning, and it's really an amazing thing how Prabhupada was so patient, and he just introduced things very slowly.
When the Swami would walk into the room, into the storefront to give the class, everyone would bow down. I saw others doing it, so I started doing it. This is the very beginning. But Gargamuni wouldn't. He was the only one. He would just sit there. And this was going on for some time. And, but Garguni, I think, felt a little self-conscious about it. After class, Prabhupada would always ask for questions. So, on one occasion, then Garguni, he raised his hand and asked that, you know, the others, when you come into the room, everyone bows down, but I don't bow down, and because I don't feel like bowing down. So if I don't feel like doing it, I'm not going to do it, because then if I did it, it would be artificial. So I want to be more real, and I'm just explaining to you, and if this is all right. So Prabhupada looked at him and said, you should bow down. And by bowing down, then the feeling will come. So this is a very nice instruction. And of course, he started doing that. And it worked.
In the early days, the temples were so used to Prabhupada's personal association, and I might suggest that Prabhupada's association, particularly in the early days, particularly in a small temple, was so galvanizing that when Prabhupada was there, he was like a magnet, and everything else was like iron filings. Everyone knew how to act, everyone knew what to do when Srila Prabhupada was present. All things fell into place. It was very simple to be a devotee. It was very simple to be spiritual. If he said, this is how to cook dal, suddenly you became empowered to cook dal. If he said, this is how you chant, suddenly you were empowered to chant. If he says, get this building, suddenly you got this building. All you had to do was have enough suspension of disbelief to go ahead and do it. And by Prabhupada's direct kinetic personal presence, it happened. So we were so used to that, and then if he told people to work together on something, never mind they were enemies 10 minutes before, they could work perfectly together. It was very much like the lion lying down with the lamb, or Lord Chaitanya going through the Jharkhanda forest. Suddenly everyone spoke the same language, and it was very easy, because he took away the ego barriers that made it impossible to see the higher self, and to see the relationship with Krishna, to see his relationship with Krishna. All in all, you know, people talk about channeling. Prabhupada was continuously channeling Super Soul. Therefore, he was channeling the source of everyone's well-being. Everyone's answer was coming from Prabhupada, because everyone's answer is ultimately coming from Super Soul. So that when you saw Prabhupada, he was like the main branch of the bank. He had it all. He had all the information. So everyone was so used to that when Prabhupada went to another temple, everyone tried and tried and tried to maintain the standard. But being what we were, it gradually would sink down like silt in a stream. And then when Prabhupada came back again, all of a sudden it was all excitement and everything worked again. So in those days, we always managed that Prabhupada would go from temple to temple to temple and keep them all revived.
I would photograph a lot, so sometimes he would tease me and he'd say, why are you photographing me so much? Photograph something important like people chanting. And actually in San Francisco, he teased me again. He said I was photographing a lot. I should have had one of those motorized drives or something. But I was just photographing. But it's because his mood changed so purely. So he said, there's a superstition in India that if someone is photographed, it will shorten their life. Or he might have said shorten their longevity. What do you think? And I stopped. I was shocked. I was photographing and he said, shorten your life. He said, what do you think? And he was looking down at me. And so I said, well, I think that it's how someone uses their life, not how long it is. And he says, yes, that is just a superstition.
The initiation was, so Prabhupada asked me that I should invite my mother to come. So I did, and she came. My father wouldn't come, but she came. And again, she sat on the chair, and we had the fire sacrifice, and then, so at the end, of course, when Prabhupada gave the beads, and then, so I bowed down to him, and then Prabhupada said, no, you bow down to your mother. So I turned and I got down and I bowed down, and of course I said the mantra of obeisances to Prabhupada. But my mother, was quite, she felt quite uncomfortable having her son bowing down at her feet. And then Prabhupada instructed me that whenever you see your mother, you bow down to her. You offer obeisances. And I used to do that. Sometimes I would go home and visit them. They lived in Connecticut. Once I went there to distribute books to all our family friends. So I would, ring the doorbell, and my mother would open the door, and there was nobody there, but there I was on the ground offering obeisances. So, she didn't like it, of course, but actually it was Prabhupada's instruction, and we did it, and we felt closer to Prabhupada following. And of course the attachment, mother-son family attachment was kind of dissipated by that. It made the relationship more formal. So it was a nice instruction.
At the initiation, he said in our name, but I was afraid at the initiation. I kind of knew that it meant that I'd have to be surrendering. We didn't really know what we were in for. There was no great movement at the time. As I say, there was 12, 14, 16 people around. Prabhupada was very kind, and we were eating and chanting, and no bowing down, no head shaving, a lot of fun. He was like our father, this great Swami sitting in our midst. People were still coming off LSD trips in the early morning kirtans as part of the whole scene. They'd have all-night trips, and the best place to go to the Krishna temple, chant, even if it was a bummer trip, and they give you breakfast. So people were coming around. And so Prabhupada, at my initiation, there were all sorts of freaks. The temple was smoking like anything because Janaki brought fruit box wood, pulped wood instead of real wood, fruit box. And we had ghee instead of butter, so it sputtered and smoked all over the place. I'm afraid my old jazz friends are coming into the place I was living and saying, don't get initiated, stay with us. Some Christian shows up saying that this is all, what do they call it, paganism, and I shouldn't do it, and he's arguing with me, and I'm kind of being swayed, and the next day, the day of initiation, actually it started off, Jamuna had actually asked me to marry her in Golden Gate Park, and we weren't sure we had a number of people who could have married us, but we said we would really like the Swami to do it. So we asked him, would you marry us? And he said, first you must become initiated. So I said, when do you want us to become initiated? And he said, tomorrow. Another one of those reading the mind things, because I knew that inside and viscerally, intrinsically, I knew that it meant surrender. So tomorrow came, and I had still been hanging out with my other friends, and they were in the temple, and I was calling, I'm coming, and then I'd say, I don't want to do it, and it was like up to the time. They weren't sure if I was going to show. So finally I show. Jamuna's there. We're stringing the beads up to the time, getting fruit box wood, getting ghee instead of made out of margarine. And four of us were getting initiated. Shamadasi. Then there was another woman who had a child. Was that at the wedding? No, I think it was at the initiation. There was a child, and the woman was a really space cadet. She was one of the people, I think, who wanted to marry Prabhupada. And the child's head kept on hitting the floor, bonk, bonk. During the initiation, Prabhupada said his name would be Kaviraj, and he said, "Will be strong, strong baby," because he saw his, and he said to the mother, "Lift him up." So he gives me an R name, and then he says, "No, you will be Guru Das," which was great because I was so frightened at the time that I didn't hear my name anyway. Plus I was photographing it all. I was the ISKCON photographer. And people were on all sorts of psychotropics, and the fires there, and at our wedding, and at our initiation. So then I said to Prabhupada, "When would you like us to get married?" And he said, "Tomorrow." So it's the same thing. He didn't want to give me time to think too much.
When I did join, I joined just a matter of weeks before Srila Prabhupada arrived. So I'd been doing work, fixing up the temple, fixing up Sankirtan vans, and doing all sorts of work. And when Srila Prabhupada was due to arrive, they rented an apartment for him on Ashbury Street, I believe. And they told me, "Quick, Narnoyan, you have to do something and build an altar for Srila Prabhupada." So I actually went and I took pieces of wood and turned turnings, and I made an altar for Srila Prabhupada. Very simple, but altar, decorated it. So when Srila Prabhupada came, there was an altar, and he asked, "Who is making this altar?" And they said, "Narayan." He said, "Oh, bring him here." Actually, I wasn't named Narayan, I wasn't initiated. He's Nathan Baruch. So I came, and he approved. Actually, but before that time, I'd written a letter to Srila Prabhupada, and he had responded to me with my karma name. Before he actually came to Los Angeles, I wrote and said, "I wanted to serve Krishna in every way possible." And he wrote back and said, "My dear Nathan Baruch, this is a very rare manifestation. I think you were a devotee in your previous life. To begin your service, wanting to serve Krishna in every way possible, means you have done devotional service before." He said, "So please continue to do that, chant your rounds, do these services, carve deities." And he gave me actually these blessings through his very first letter, which was a letter which in itself was enough to keep me going for a lifetime.
The first bloop is a good story. There's somebody named Rabindra's Swarup. Sensitive, poetic-looking, ascetic-looking type of person. Very thoughtful, obviously loved Prabhupada. Came from New York in about the second or third wave. Prabhupada recognized him from New York, and he didn't say too much. He was a very sensitive person, and sometimes things came out honestly and abruptly. He said what he thought, and Prabhupada loved him very much. Now, there was a Vyasasan. Finally, there was a Vyasasan, and Prabhupada was sitting up on it. It wasn't that high, but it was above the floor, maybe as high as that desk, this high. And in the middle of the Kirtan, Rabindra's Swarup called out and said, I've got to reach God directly. I cannot do it through anybody else." This was his conflict. He didn't want to do it with any priest, any intermediary. Now, Prabhupada heard him say that, and Rabindra Swarup started crying. It was such an important thing to him. It was such an important conflict. He loved Prabhupada, but he wanted to do it. He says, "I've got to do it on my own." This was his conflict. And so Prabhupada said, "Come here, my boy." And Rabindra Swarup came right up on the Vyasasan and put his head there right in Prabhupada's lap. And Prabhupada said, "Dear, dear my boy, I just want you to be happy. I just want you to be happy." And he was looking up into Prabhupada's face and crying. And Prabhupada was looking down, very compassionate, and just said, I just want you to be happy. And then Ravindra Swarup bolted up off the Vyasasana and bolted out of the front doors. It was all one room. It wasn't anybody sneaking out in the middle of the night. And it was actually like a play, because we were all there and we saw him run out. And we were shaken by it, all of us, because we were a family. We were a family then, and that's the way it always has been in most of my Krishna consciousness, even after some time pioneering whatever, because there's small temples with few people and we're building together. So we were not that many people, and we were his wife, I don't know if they are officially married, his girlfriend, Haladar, was there. She didn't know whether she would ever see him again. He just left. We saw him fleeting from the front of the temple after he slammed the door. Prabhupada said, now let us chant. And he led with the sizzling kartals, played them so nicely, or the bongos in those days. Didn't say anything after that. We chanted, we were crying. Somebody else might have heard something. I don't remember him saying anything about it.
Then at a certain point, Prabhupada got the stroke. That was Memorial Day.
Oh, good. I was just about to mention that. Because some people told me they wanted enough cardboard in there. It's full.
Yeah.
Good, good. All right. I sure enjoyed the garage sale yesterday. I got lots of good stuff. There's not too many books or doing some stuff, but I got also nice cute clothes, basically. Good stuff. Yeah, good time. And the shot was good. Right. I like the maple donuts. Trying to probably just said, here, get me a box, like, how many you got there, I love it. I has to do it all, and I got lots of free stuff and things. We do this all the time, just like Family Giant said yesterday, 28% of the people came from, out of the community. I don't think I got advertised though. I didn't see it on Craigslist. It wasn't. I looked again. No. It's a big place. Okay. You should mention it. Did you see any newspaper ads? Newspaper ads. She did newspaper ads. Craigslist is a big one, though. Yes. And Pinterest, too.
long box. Go into the cooler and you can put it on. Way to the back, there's a shelf in. Way to the back, that long metal shelf.